She's always thinking of other people. Now, you may remember this. I almost forgot our friend these. This is the final joint courthouse parking study for 2001. 2001. Yeah, I found this today. I think it's in this report, actually. Well, here it is. Oh, I know. Tom Phillips is chairman.
Yeah, I see it, okay.
Last for 2001. All right. Well, big names. Back in the day. He should answer all questions. It's what actually yeah. The deeds for now I found a draft report. My journal service schedule was out on vacation this week. Trying to find a final report. Bound report on nice drawings and stuff, but I thought I'd bring the written final report. But for some of the properties that are listed there now been sold, not been. Yes, edition is 91, and this was 2001. Talking to Judge Lowe and others, like as soon as we opened the 91 edition, we knew we were full. So I think that's why this couldn't go on. What's that? I couldn't require more apartments. Right, you probably need 231.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
I think you put that.
Here it comes. About the one.
Any hard road historic
Mayor, how are you?
Would be easy.
And then we can just go to
Oh, yeah.
meeting's ordered back, yeah.
Pretty smart,
Sir,
Let me have your attention, please. Would you please silence your cell phones before we start the meeting? I want to welcome all of you to the July 18, 2019 council work session. Appreciate you all coming out. And we have some special guests here tonight, today. And members of the Board of Supervisors and County Administrator.
and Alicia Rowland, the clerk.
What?
Alicia Rowland, the clerk.
She's the one that keeps us really straight.
Okay. Kim, would you call a roll, please?
Mr. Bradley.
Here.
Ms. Quetch. Here. Mr. Webb.
Here.
Ms. Patterson. Here. Mayor Craig.
Here. First item on the agenda is public comments. We have 3 people signed up to speak. When you speak, please speak at the podium and state your name and address before you start. And please limit your speech to, or your comments to 3 minutes if possible. So first speaker is Joyce Farratt. Farratt, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Craig and members of Abingdon's Town Council. I'm Joyce Farratt. I live and have a bed and breakfast at 254 Whites Mill Road in the old and historic district of Abingdon. I am here to encourage and urge you to look at the increasing deer population in Abingdon. These deer are not healthy, and they present a problem of disease, ticks, danger on our streets, and ruining the beauty and food sources of Abingdon residents. The deer follow a pattern from William King, Leonard Street, High Street, Mason Place, Church Street, Crestview, Gillespie Drive, Valley View, Whites Mill Road, White Street, Valley Street, Walden Road, Plum Alley, and even Main Street. My deep concern is that the deer have no fear of traffic as they dart out on all these streets, and they pose a danger to the tourists who visit our town and also the residents who live here. As a resident and business owner, I endeavor to keep my location beautiful for others to enjoy, and the deer have eaten most of my plantings, especially the 25 hydrangeas at a great expense that I have in a fenced garden. They have consumed all of the tender growth, and I have no blooms. At this time, I would like to pass out to each of you a list of my sister who lives on Mason Place, and this is a list of items in her garden that have been eaten by the deer. So I will give these to you if you will pass those around. I used to think that deer were really cute, that they were wonderful little animals, until now, when we are overpopulated in our town with the deer. And I'm sure that each of you have had some experience with deer on our streets. I appreciate your time for listening to me, and I ask you to consider this matter. I know that there are others here who will address the urgency of this deer problem as well as myself. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, the next speaker is Tom McMullen.
Good afternoon, Town Council folks and everybody else. My name is Tom McMullen. I live at 267 Whites Mill Road. I'm also here to talk about the deer issue in town. I've lived in our home for over 19 years now. I've lived here in Abingdon about 23 years. And the deer population, like Joyce was saying, I definitely thought they were cute at first. But right up the hill from our backyard, back behind Bird Niece's house, there's some apple trees. There is a herd that's been growing for the last 10 years. It used to be just a few deer. Last time I got a big count, there was like 17 of them up there. And this herd, like she was talking about, has this circle route that it goes through town. And for example, the first day of school last year, I was sitting on the porch with my boys waiting for the bus, and 10 deer walked right across White Street, right through the traffic. And so it really concerns me that the deer are going to hurt somebody. But honestly, I have a more selfish concern, and that is my yard. Those of you that know me already know that I'm on Sustain Abingdon. I'm often seen as a very green and environmental person in the town, but I'm also an environmental scientist. I've been trained as a biologist, and the deer population does need some mechanism to control it. I'm not sure what we're going to choose to do that. I hope you choose something to help us out here. But we need something to control the deer population. In my yard, I grow an immense amount of food for my family. We've got meat rabbits and chickens. I've got dogs. We've got guinea pigs. We've got a cat. We've got a whole bunch of stuff in there. But in the last few years, the deer finally made it down to my lower backyard instead of just the upper backyard. And in the lower yard, that's where I grow my tomatoes. And you mess with my tomatoes, I get upset. I get really upset. So, for example, this year, I put a couple $100 worth of deer fencing in recently to try to keep this one doe out, and it still hasn't helped. She's found a different way in, so I'm going to have to spend at $12 per T-post, have to spend another $100 to $200 buying T-posts to put in even more deer fencing, hoping it'll keep them out. But they've totally destroyed my mulberry tree where they could reach everything. They've eaten up all my sweet potatoes up there. They've eaten my blueberries, blueberry bushes. They've really caused a lot of damage. And I'm really hoping we do something. The level at which they are domesticated and friendly is getting kind of scary. I'll send my dogs up there after them. My dogs will run right past them because they think there's a groundhog instead. The deer just stand there. I drop a friend off drop my son's friend off at his house, and there's always a deer in his yard, and it just stands there and looks at me. So I think if we were to try to clear some of them out, that might be the best option here. Is this a good time for questions, or am I not supposed to ask for questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is David Cowell.
Good afternoon. My name is David Kelb. I live at 1151 Panorama Drive in Abingdon. I'm here as a representative of the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. I was invited by Tom to come and speak to you all today to let you know that there are a multitude of mechanisms that we as an agency have worked with over decades to try and help towns and cities in small areas, even homeowners associations, when applicable, to solve the issues related to deer damage, and some of the problems that are associated with that, high deer densities. So I'm not here to present a public opinion. I'm just here to offer my assistance or the assistance of our agency as needed if you'd like to discuss some of the solutions that are available to the town at any later date. So I'll just pass out some of my business cards, and you can feel free to contact me at any time. We're very happy to help solve this issue. We understand that this does become an issue in several places where we have high human densities in relation to very close to urban areas. And this is not a new problem for the state of Virginia. There are many solutions that have happened, and they vary across the state depending on how cities and townships and homeowners associations want to solve that problem amongst themselves. So I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to help in any way that we can.
Let me be clear. Did you say you would be willing to come to a work session?
Absolutely.
And have it on the agenda, and you tell us what those options are?
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our speakers. Next item on the agenda is presentation regarding Washington County Courthouse. I guess Phil McCall's gonna give that, is that right?
Read my mind.
Yeah. I'll delegate Mr. Berry to lead us off here.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thanks for allowing us to be here, and I guess I'll go over the highlights and really just spend time with you on question and answers if that's the way you want to do it, Mr. Mayor.
That'll be fine.
All right, before you've got a couple of pages I handed out, and this is, we started this roadshow, if you will, about 3 weeks ago with town hall meetings, Kiwanis, Rotary, basically any group that'll talk to us or listen to us and engage, but the issue of the courthouse is not a new one. Washington County's been, for the last 6 years, has a courthouse committee made up of 2 members of the Board of Supervisors, the courthouse staff, the judges, the sheriff's office, all the different parties to address the issues within the courthouse. And the little sheet that you have before you, and this is online at washcovacourthouse.com, so it's publicly accessible, but space, access, security is their 3 filters that we're talking about, and that really is what it boils down to. The building is 3 separate buildings, post-Civil War reconstruction, then there was a 1950s section and a 1991 section. So today, the courthouse is about 48,000 square feet. The 2016 study we had with Thompson Litton using the Virginia Supreme Court standards says we need 88,000 square feet today. So obviously we're short on space. Access has always been an issue. You'll see that number at the top, about 420 visitors a day is what's averaged in our courthouse. Of course, everything from gun permits to marriage license to all the court services, traffic tickets, you name it, genealogy work, etc. The reality about access, not only are we full within the 4 walls of the courthouse, but you'll see that point in the middle, there's 75 spaces for 77 employees. And an ongoing issue going back to even the 90s with the last expansion was once they expanded, there was still a parking issue. So parking's a major issue, space is an issue, and then security, without going into those issues, and the sheriff is the resident expert on security, but if you've entered our courthouse, there's not a lot of room there. So the phrases and the things I use is clearly, in today's world, you want a lot more space than what we have in the current entrance of the courthouse to provide a safe environment. At our first town hall meeting on Monday, I shared with the public, I don't think it made the news, but we've had 2 inmates get loose just this year at the courthouse. And what used to be the Sallyport entrance back by Plum Alley is now, as of just 3 weeks ago, is now spaces for the new judges that started July 1. So the secure area for inmates to enter our courthouse today is now office space. That was just converted over the last couple of months. So those are some of the high-level issues. I did pass out, and Mr. Bradley and I were chatting earlier, I think he remembers this study, but back in 2001, actually it was 99 and 2000, and it ended in a 2001 study. I brought you the written version. The town council and the board of supervisors jointly had a parking study to address issues of parking back in 2000. Some of those options are probably not viable today, but I really want to bring that to you for historical context and just to show you another bit of information that this has been a long-standing issue. So with those 3 high-level overviews, on the flip side of your page, 1, 2, and 3 are actually 3 options that the courthouse committee has come up with. The board of supervisors are well aware of it. And basically, build a new courthouse is option 1. Option 2, stay where we are. And option 3 is the adaptive reuse of the former Kmart facility in the middle of Abingdon off Cummings Street. If we were to move the circuit court from the current location, state law requires a referendum of the people. So if you choose option 1 or option 3, either one of those will require a referendum of the people. So no matter what the county via the board of supervisors decides to do with an option 1 or 3, it goes to the people in a referendum, and if they want it to happen, fine. If they don't, fine. But in a nutshell, I'll go over the numbers. A new construction on new property, we believe would be about $33 million. And that second bar you see above, that's $24 million in finance costs. So we believe it's a total financial impact to Washington County and the taxpayers of $57 million. Option 2 is if we were to stay in the current facility, and the Elliott building is the building that used to be dispatch, used to be the Chamber of Commerce, and way back the telephone company, could be torn down and rebuilt to a 4-story structure. And that building still wouldn't give us all the square footage we need, but we do believe if that was an option that the county moved out with, we'd get about 10 more years of good life out of the current courthouse. Now, if that's the issue, and let's fast forward to 10 years, working with our financial advisors, that number of $42 million is a number we believe it would cost to build a new courthouse 10 years from now. So once you look at, and the reason we share all these numbers is the general fund of the budget that the board approves that ultimately sets the tax rate for the taxpayers is going to have to pay for any of these options. So we believe in option 2 with the short-term solution at Elliott, longer term with financial cost is a $91 million cost to the taxpayers of Washington County. And then 3, the adaptive reuse of the former Kmart, buying it from Mr. Smith for about $5.2 million. We believe $20 million cost to renovate that building would be a $25 million cost. Finance cost of 18 makes it a $43 million project. So those are, in a big picture, the cost to the 3 options. I would say with options 1 and 2, working with their financial advisors, we do see a potential tax increase on real estate taxes for those to occur, anywhere between 5 cents per hundred on 1 to 7 cents per hundred on 2. 3, we say potentially it's likely a no tax increase. And the reason for that is the county's fortunate that the debt profile of the county's been dropping off the last couple of years. In the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to continue to drop off, which is good. So if we were to take on new debt close to $25 million with finance cost, the county believes we could actually replace the old debt with new debt and not require a tax increase, therefore not a hit to the general fund of the county. So those are the items there. And then these renderings we did, and we did this because we had a lot of questions about what would a former strip mall, i.e. former Kmart, look like if it was a courthouse. So this is a rendering of what it could look like. So we just share that for information. But at the end of the day, again, I'll just close by saying Judge Johnson was here, or Judge Lowe. I think they would tell you the current facility is not adequate for current courthouse operations or future courthouse operations. So the reality is we have a situation we've got to address. What's the best solution? I think the truth of it is no matter which one we choose, or which one the people ultimately choose, if it requires a referendum, not all people are going to be happy, but we have to do something. Now, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if we go to referendum and it fails, then the county will not be able to go back to referendum for 10 years. So if 1 or 3 were on the referendum, say this November or even next year, and the people didn't support it, then the county's pretty much stuck where we are. And frankly, you know, from an operational perspective, which is what they pay me for, and financially, in a lot of ways, number 2 is kind of where the county is. So I think that's the truth and reality of the situation we face today. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll take any questions, comments, and more than glad to.
Council, you have questions or comments?
Ask away. There are no secrets, and if I don't know the answer, we'll figure it out for you.
I think I wouldn't be too unhappy with a little tax increase myself to support the county that's its growth of the courthouse. I think the courthouse. I know the courthouse is way behind.
There have been some statements recent, and I think that this has been clarified, but I think people have said generally that the Historic Society, and I see Mr. Seaver here, maybe he knows the history of this better than that. He can't ever hear me when I'm talking, but he'll see anyway. But
He's talking about you, Mr. Seaver.
But that the Historic Society had been against a parking garage in the past, and the reason that there isn't a parking garage there was generally, and I think just generally historic-minded people, I think, is sort of the urban legend of all of that. And I think Mr. Giesler spoke at the last meeting, and he's been on the Historic Review Preservation Board for a long time, and said that such a proposal had never been brought before the town proper. And I think that's Mr. Bradley's recollection and that sort of thing. I just wanted to clarify that it's not no entity, no portion of the town has opposed a
Correct.
parking garage solution in the past.
And I think Mr. McCall was around. In fact, that study from 2001 has him as part of that committee.
If I can just say something, I was on that committee then, and we looked at it, we really wanted to build a parking garage at that time. But like I said, the Sprint building was down there in the corner, and it was, I'm not sure how much it was gonna cost them to move it. There's a lot of technology in there, fiber optics now, and it would probably be, I would guess, $3 to $4 million just to move that building and what's in it. And I don't know what all would be done to do that. But the parking garage, the footprint of it was gonna take in that building, also the building where Emmett Urie built the log house. So that was placed there, so that put an end to that part of the expansion on that. And Mr. Andy Hoggroves, he was on this board, and he was representing the Historic Society at that time, and he told us if we tried to build a parking garage, that would be tied up in courts for years. So that's pretty much when we dropped that idea, because we couldn't see spending a lot of money going to court when we couldn't do anything with it. But, and that's when the idea come up, telling the police officers to start marking the tires for 2-hour parking. That's when that all got started. But like Jason was saying, if we do try to leave it there on the Courthouse Hill, which one thing that really helped Courthouse Hill was when we moved the treasurer and Commissioner Revenue off that hill. When we used to have reassessments, people would have to park down at the lower parking lots and the church parking lots. And the farther up that hill they got, the farther up the hill they got, the madder they got when they come up there and talk about the reassessments. So it was great to get them off that hill. It didn't help, well, it helped parking some, but there's not much parking around that building anyway. All those people were parking on the streets. But if we do have to leave it on the Courthouse Hill, the Elliott Building is going to be a major undertaking, because we will probably have to tear it down, have to move everybody out of it, they'll have to relocate it for 2-3 years.
Probably 2 years.
To get it done, and we're not sure what's under it. We know the cave house is down there, and there's caves under there. So if there's caves under the Elliott Building also, to go up for 2 to 3, 4 stories, you'll have to have a tremendous footer put under it. So we're not sure what there, that it'd be core drillings and everything else. So this will be a major undertaking and a hassle for people going through town while all this construction was going on.
Jason, I don't understand the referendum. Could you explain that? How is that going to be?
Yeah, it's, well, Mr. Bell might know better being an attorney, so I've learned more about it than I ever thought I would know in the last year or so. But what I know from Ms. Phillips, a county attorney, is, and it's an old law, it goes back like close to 100 years or something like that, but we can move, if we wanted to, we can move everything out of that courthouse but circuit court. The law of Virginia says circuit court has to stay in the county seat, which in this case is the town of Abingdon, and if it moves from its current location, physically where it is, you have to have a referendum. And on that referendum, it says you want it to be moved to X location, and if you borrow money, X dollars. And it's a yes or no vote on those 2 items. So like Monday night, they're like, what's on the referendum? I said, well, basically in layman term, it's where is it going and how much does it cost? If that fails, the law says you can't go back to the people and ask for a referendum to relocate a courthouse, i.e. circuit court, for 10 years. So it's really that cut and dried, and my personal and professional opinion is it really ties the hands of localities to have that kind of law on the books, but they don't pay me for my opinions of legislation, but that's, in a nutshell, that's what it is.
And on the referendum, we can only have one choice.
Right,
You
that's
can't
right.
have the 3 choices, you have one choice.
It moves from its current location to this place, and it costs this amount of money, and that's it.
Right.
That answers my question.
Yeah, okay.
Right, and we can only do either 1 or 3. If it's number 2, we won't have a referendum. We stay where we're at.
Right.
There's been other proposals. Well, we had a meeting Monday night with public input. One of their proposals is moving everything but the circuit court from the current courthouse, moving somewhere, another location somewhere. If we do that, we will have to purchase another building, property somewhere, and also put the same security in it. It's not like it used to be. You can't walk in and out of the courthouse anymore. You just can't do it. But we would have to have the metal detectors, the more security, more police officers. We'd have to match what we have at the courthouse now. So that'd be an added expense there, plus the building. and then you still don't have extra parking on the courthouse hill.
Well,
I would love to leave the courthouse where it's at, I really would. But we're between a knot in a hard place. And like Mr. Johnson has told us, Sage, is that if we did do the restoring of the current courthouse, and possibly the next day or two after that, he would write a letter to the state Supreme Court saying we're still under the square footage we need for them to do what they're doing. So then we've been non-compliance then, and then they could come up and tell us, well, you've got to do this.
And that's a good point. The county's trying to be proactive in this process because Smith County, our neighbors just up the road, did not move as fast as the judge wanted in that case, and it was Judge Lowe at the time. And he basically wrote a court order, which went to Supreme Court, and they mandated they fix their problem. So
it was expensive.
well, it was I think it was about $8 million is what they thought, and they ended up with close to $30 million in the end. So to say at least of impact to their budget, it was a big one.
So this is something that's going to happen. If we don't move now, the state's gonna tell us you've got to move. That's why we're trying to come up with a solution to our problem. We're not being pushy. We're not, at least I'm not doing it. We just want to get it done so we don't have the state telling us what we have to do. I want us to do what we need to do.
I don't think technically the state can tell you to move somewhere else. They can require, if the certain parameters are met, that they upgrade the existing facility.
Well, and that's a good point. Other localities in Virginia have had referendums that have failed, and when that happens, they've had to put, I believe, a lot more money into their projects at the current location, their current courthouse, than they probably plan to do. So it does create a different paradigm for a locality if that becomes the outcome.
Jason, on this potential solution sheet,
Yes, sir.
you indicate parking issue resolved. Are you all going to buy a certain area, or how's that going to work? Or are you going to share those spaces, or are you going to actually buy a certain number of parking?
It's a good question. The county attorney's already drafted up and will probably be before the board in the next few weeks, a potential purchase agreement if they were to go with option 3, let's say. In that scenario, if that's where the county heads, the option would only be exercised if a favorable outcome of a referendum occurred. So the county would not buy a piece of property unless we needed it. But from our research and looking at the property, you can subdivide that shopping center, subject to the town approval, and subdivide it just like any piece of property, and we would take just the former Kmart building and 350 spaces right in front of the building. And then the rest of the spaces would go with the balance of the shopping center.
Okay.
So we do believe on paper, by plat, subject to the town's approval, if we go down that option, that it can be done in that scenario. Now, I will say one thing, the rear of the property, which is the Cook Street access point, that would be the rear entrance for inmates and judicial staff and judges if that's where it was to locate.
Would you clear up something for me, if you don't mind, or for us, if there's any muddy water here to not see clearly through?
Okay.
If you're gonna have a referendum for number 1 and number 3, how do we know that number 2, how are you gonna arrive at number 2 without a referendum?
Well, Mr. McCall was kind of touched on that point. We will not have a referendum on 2 options. The board will have to decide later this summer if they want to do option 1, 2, or 3. If they choose 1 or 3, that will require a referendum vote, but you can only put 1 option. So let's just kind of take 2 off the table, if you will, for the moment. The board will choose, let's say, between 1 or 3. If that's the case, then only one of those 2 would go on referendum. And that's just because the law is that specific.
It's not gonna be either or. They can't say, do you want one or
There's
do you
one
want
option.
3?
Yeah.
It's gonna be one of the options.
One of those 2 options would be on the referendum, if that's how it turns out.
And that's why we're having these community meetings with
Feedback.
all the different groups to get their input. I mean, it's gonna be up to the people. If it's on the referendum, they're the ones voting on it. We're just trying to make a great presentation for them of what the options are.
So y'all are keeping track of number 2, just kind of mentally keeping
Sure.
what you're doing?
We're actually, Ms. Rowland is the county's public information officer. She's been designated, she's also my executive assistant, so she's my right and left arm. But she is keeping track of all the feedback on the website, all the community meetings, anybody calls in the offices. So we're collecting that, and we want to hear if people like 1, 2, or 3, because at the end of the day, I think that's going to help the board make a decision, and then when they make their decision, if it is 1 or 3, then the people will ultimately decide if they like that idea. So,
Well, if you decide to move it, or you have any thoughts or plans about the building that remains?
well, that's a good question. We are getting feedback on that as well, so it's a good question. I've talked to your town manager. We've talked about that. There's a lot of ideas, office space, boutique hotel. Monday night, we heard the library. We've heard a museum. So,
We heard they want to move the chamber back up there.
oh yes, that's one. So there's a lot of different ideas right now, and if y'all have got any that you'd like to share, you think we need to consider, if we were to move, we're taking those too. I mean, obviously, I said this Monday, I've said to other groups, we know the courthouse is a major structure to downtown Abingdon. It's a significant historical contributing structure to the town. So if we were to move, I don't think the county wants to do anything to hurt that structure nor the town of Abingdon. So whatever happens, we want to be a good partner.
Have you heard anybody say anything about moving any of the courthouse at all into the Commissioner of Revenue's old building there on Main?
Well, to get down in the weeds a little bit with you, yes. If we were to say 2 is our route, we're going to renovate, we'll have to renovate the former Treasurer's building, and potentially we could put the Commonwealth Attorney's office in there. As you build an Elliott structure, because he's currently in the existing Elliott building, and then backfill other court operations in there. So we're gonna have to play a little bit of a, might call it a shell game of moving people around if we stay where we are. But Mr. McCall made a good point. If we stay, we're gonna have to find another building, because you just don't have the square footage to build the structure you need for the long-term needs of the courts. So, we are in a rock and a hard place.
If we do move people over to the old Treasurer's building, I believe we'd have to do quite a bit of work, because I don't think it's handicap accessible.
That's
It
true.
doesn't meet all the standards that would need to be done for a major renovation like we'd have to do. So that would be, is there an elevator in it?
There's no elevator. You need an
So,
elevator.
it would possibly have to be one of those, because if you utilize downstairs or the upstairs part of it.
And that building's had mold issues downstairs in the basement forever. If you've ever been there, I mean, that's, David, Henry, and Fred Parker are glad to get out of there. I
Donnie
guess it's Melvin
Davis, she
Ritchie.
was down there for years.
Yeah. It's not,
Thompson and Litton said it would be 1.6 or something like that, as part of their option to upgrade that building, as I recall.
yeah, somewhere near 2 million. I can't remember the number exactly, but yes.
There's been a committee that's existed on this issue for 6 years, I
Correct.
believe, as Judge Johnson has said, that talked about it for a while. What is the impetus for 2019 being the cutoff of the decision has to be made now? Has somebody said that? I missed it if so.
Well, I mean, I think the judges have made it clear to the board, myself and Mr. Hill, who's my general service manager. Frankly, we're happy with the county's progress of looking at all the options and kicking all the tires, but, we got to keep moving. And I've got board members saying, hey, if we don't move, they're going to move for us. So no one's pointing their finger saying you have to do it now, but we're at a point where if we stop, we believe, we think we know the outcome, the judge is going to order something. If we don't keep moving forward, then we've kind of wasted 6 years from my perspective. So I think it's just at a point where, now we want to put this out there in the public realm, get the feedback, and I mean, theoretically, it'd be up to the board. I don't have a vote in it, but if they don't want to do it this year, it could be next year potentially, but it'd be up to the board. But frankly, we're just at a point where, we want to push it out there and see what the people thought. So, I mean, there's only so many times you can study that old building or look at others. And I said Monday night, the option 3 came up over the last year or so as we've been looking at the option 1 and 2, if you will. So, with time, more and more things come to the table. And in fact, since this has been out, I probably had 4 or 5 property owners call me and say, hey, we'll sell our land to you for that new courthouse. So, anyway, hopefully that answered your question, but
Yes, sir.
it's,
Thank you.
Another thing on this is the courthouse has to stay in the town of Abingdon, in the county seat. We can't go out in the county. I don't know if I know the circuit.
just the circuit court.
The others could go out, but we have to keep it in, and then for the square footage, the Kmart building was the only one that we know of inside the town limits, already built, that we could renovate and move into in a quicker period of time.
Phil, you could let us expand our boundaries and solve
Yeah,
that.
I'm saying that. Which way you want to go? You want to come out my way, and then I'll just run for town council.
I'm glad y'all have a good relationship.
Always good to have what neighborly.
Council, you have any other questions? Jason, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank y'all for letting us speak.
Thank you.
There will be more meetings. There'll be one tonight at Ray Valley at 6 o'clock, one at Patrick Henry Friday night at 6, and one at John Battle Monday night at 6 o'clock. You're all welcome to come.
I'd like to make one comment.
Sure.
If you look at the 91 million, Jason said it was basically 7 cents on your tax rate. The average house in Washington County is about $140,000. So that's $100 a year for every house in Washington County to keep the courthouse where it is. Just throw that number out there.
Well, thank all of you for
No,
coming.
thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
it. Okay.
We're gonna run away if that's okay.
That's good.
This is gonna be interesting, Jason. Stay here.
No, you don't have to say.
You can cheer and clap and do all kinds.
They're on the taxpayers' dollar. They need to go back and do some real work.
I am still a town resident, so,
One thing I would like to add on what Ms. Farrett was talking about, we do have a groundhog problem in town of Abingdon also.
Yes.
We've got a skunk problem too.
Well,
We got a squirrel
They
with this.
just squirted my dog.
been there, done that.
Tell him to like that.
Thank y'all again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you.
Thank you.
They got too much trouble with it.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is discussion regarding installing sidewalks between Hutton Street to Cambridge Street on Main Street. Mr. Quetch.
All right. Well, I made a few notes here, but I'm gonna need Matt and Cam's input here a little bit. But, you know, I really don't know the history, or the reason why we don't already have a sidewalk there. But I don't believe there's a person in town that would drive by there and think that we don't need a sidewalk, because the weeds and the grass sometimes are 2 feet tall, and then there's a little path about this big where you can walk or run. So, I think it's time we put a sidewalk there. And, my understanding is there's a local doctor fell there. And before long, there'll be a lot of kids running through there, with the sports, that's involved with sports at Abingdon High School.
And the deer use it too. I had to go back.
So, I don't feel like it's safe, and, like I said, I don't know the history. Maybe somebody can inform council more of the history here, but, you know, I think it's time we put a sidewalk there. There's no sidewalk across the street because, you know, it's parking lots. and-
Utilities.
Yeah, so we need a sidewalk. So would y'all like to?
I'm happy to take a stab at this issue. Again, it's, I'm the same as Mrs. Quetch, that I'm just hearing hearsay about the issue about adversarial relationship between the town and the property owner. But we've done some deed research and some surveying research, and you know, there is a street right-of-way that is so wide. Preliminarily, I would say that it's not quite wide enough to build a sidewalk like we'd want it to, so we'd have to reach out to the property owner and say that we need to acquire some right-of-way to build a sidewalk. I think that's probably our next step, is that town staff needs to reach out to the property owner and say, this, the council's interested in this. Would you be willing to sell your property for a right-of-way? I think, in my opinion, that's the next step.
Yeah. I would-
And then further actions would be dependent on what that response is.
Matt, what is a standard sidewalk width?
5 feet. 5 feet.
Could you maybe contract that a little bit, 4 or 3 feet?
No,
Not for ADA, I think it's
No.
gotta be 5, I think, right?
it's got to be 5.
Yeah.
How long of a stretch are we talking there?
Let's see. We just measured it. 160 feet.
It's not that much. But it, I believe it.
But we do have some possibly, because staff did find an older survey, and it looks like the right-of-way does maybe go in partially into.
Partially, there was
into the- where the sidewalk
Yeah, the
goes.
survey that we found from the late '80s, early '90s showed a right of way, and it showed an old fence that was there. And I have not been out to the field since we found the survey, but apparently there's a highway monument, concrete monument out there, so there should be some things to work off of to verify where the right of way is.
Matt, does our subdivision code say also new sidewalks have to be 5 feet as well? Or is that not been updated since the new standards came out?
The subdivision ordinance references the town standard streets, and it shows 5
It
feet
shows
in
5
the
feet,
streets.
that's all right.
So it's not in the code itself, but it references the drawing.
There's a separate provision of the ordinances that says that if the town proposes sidewalk work, then the landowner will pay half the cost. I think was part of the issue too.
Well, the way I read that ordinance is if the town's approached by the property owner,
The town's approached by that. Okay.
if the town's approached by the property owner, then there's a cost sharing mechanism. But if the
But
town
if
wants to build the
it's the town's
sidewalk, we always have the in our purview to fully fund it.
And I think a lot of times it happens when there's an area that maybe is not, it's still satisfactory enough to be a sidewalk, but maybe they want to make it, they want to improve the sidewalk, or there's maybe a long stretch and maybe there's 3 or 4 property owners that want to add sidewalk.
Right.
They could do that, yeah.
But if it's the town's idea, then we can pay for it ourselves.
That's my understanding,
Yeah.
yes.
So it stays in the right of way.
So, yeah, to answer your question, we need to know who owns what, where, and then see if we can come to some agreement, and if we can't come to some agreement, then there's steps that we can take if necessary.
Okay,
So,
so we put the ball in your court, right?
Yeah, just make sure everybody's in agreement with that. You?
Yeah, I have to, I mean, honestly, coming from a running background, I ran that road 15, 18 years ago, that stretch, and honestly, people trip, halfway fall all the time.
Plain dangerous.
Yes, I mean, really, it's dangerous right there, especially in inclement weather and so on and so forth. It's
How
dangerous.
about you, Cindy?
Well, I'll be in favor of
Al?
How far are we talking about, from Hutton Street to where?
From Hutton
It's a
Street.
gap in there, 160
Yeah, I know it's
feet.
cap.
It's right from Hutton Street to Rugby Terrace, and then Rugby sort of connects to Cambridge.
That's probably not 150 feet or
Yeah,
something.
that's 160.
He measured it, he
Right.
said.
160 feet, I think.
Yeah.
Just measured it, but I didn't write it down, so that's.
Anyway,
It's not a
But
big
the
one.
It looks like it's more than 100
Yeah.
feet out.
yes, I'm in favor.
Well, I'm in favor of it too, so. What else do you all need? Matt, you got money to do it, or do we need to find some money somewhere else?
I think we can probably budget in our capital improvements this year.
Okay. All right. You need anything else to proceed?
No, I'll get with Matt and we'll approach the property owner, try to meet with the property owner in person first, and then
Okay.
we'll consult with Cam after that.
Well, we need to build that sidewalk. I think it's a liability to the town, even though it may be on somebody else's property. You know, we've had that issue before, and I think we need to protect our citizens. So I think we should build it.
Okay.
Thanks,
You're welcome.
thanks, John, for bringing that up. Mr. Quetch, you've got another item. A discussion regarding blight on property.
Well, it's the same property, it's sort of in the back on Valley Street. And it blocks people's view, pedestrians and traffic entering Cambridge Street. But now it looks like, I want to get you involved in this too, it looks like somebody's been out there and sort of cut away some of the, it's just trees and brush and.
We're gonna have to go out there probably together and look at it. I've been out there a few times, and I'm not sure exactly what area you're talking about, so we're gonna have to go out there and look at it together, I think.
Well, now there is like a utility box there, pretty large. I don't know if it's cable or phone or whose box it is, but maybe they cleaned some of it away. But it's definitely, you can't see there. You're walking or driving, it's, so.
If you can, maybe tomorrow or next week, we can meet on site and make sure we're talking about the same place.
Okay, sounds
I would
good.
appreciate that.
You know what I'm talking about. don't you?
Yeah, I know. Looks really bad you bringing this up right now.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry.
I just moved out to that area, that's
Sorry,
why.
but it's true. It's true.
But I did learn about some of the issues in that area when I moved over there, and I became aware of the sidewalk through a conversation with Chief Sullivan, and I was not aware of it until he pointed it out, and then Donna had brought it up. So I mean, I do agree that it's an
The
issue.
longer you stay here, the more little issues like that.
Yeah, but she's in the same boat that I am, so she lives in that area. So.
All right. Are we done with that?
Yes.
Next item is discussion regarding the Bill Penhouse stabilization. Mr. Bundy.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think, while Mr. Boswell was out of town, he wanted me to come and give you guys an update on where we were. We do have a price currently from Rimco to do the micropile installation that would stabilize the footings. That's $187,600. And then we do have a price from Wahlberg Construction to go in and do some wall washers to help hold the walls together, which I think they ought to do that prior to the micropile installation, so that's stabilized. I forwarded those prices on to Mr. Boswell and Mr. Statzer. There's proposals from the two contractors, and waiting to hear back from approval on that or go from there.
What's the price on the tie bolts?
I apologize. 39,616.
Okay, so, and you can only get one quote for this because it's highly specialized stuff, is that right?
That's true, yes.
Cam, is that okay for us to award that way?
Sure. If we
Okay.
send it out for proposal and only got one response, that's all there is.
Council, you all want to get this started today, or do you want to put this on the agenda for the next meeting?
Can we push this back and push this back? Can we go ahead and do
I'd
it?
like to do it
I
now.
agree. I don't like normally to take action in the work session, but we need to get on with this. We've messed around with it.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, how long do you think it might take that we'll get all this done, you know?
The only delay will probably be getting Rimco out there to do the work, and we'll get Warburg to be doing the washers in the meantime. It will take them, I would say, less than 2 months to get mobilizing out there and get that in place. And then Rimco, once they get there, it would only take them a couple weeks to do the micropiles, but it's just a matter of getting them mobilized. So I would think 3 to 4 months we could have it done.
What are you proposing that council act on?
Award the contract to these two firms.
Yeah.
We want to wait and do that.
No, I'm wondering whether you haven't already delegated that authority to Mr. Boswell.
We normally approve bids, Ken. Even if we say we're gonna do something, we normally approve the award of a contract.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then we need a motion.
I'd like to make that motion.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Ms. Patterson to award the contract, $187,000 to Rimco for the mini piles and
39,616 to
You
Wahlberg.
call them tie bolts?
Yeah,
Okay.
wall washers, what I call them.
Okay.
Mayor Craig, if I could, please, $187,600, I believe you said for Rimco, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
You got that, Kim?
Yes, sir.
And the motion is to authorize the town manager to sign the contract,
Sign the
the applicable
contract.
contract.
Okay. All right, do I hear a second? You seconded it, didn't you?
Yes.
All right. Second by Mr. Bradley. Any discussion? Kim, call a roll, please.
Mr. Bradley?
Aye.
Ms. Quetch?
Aye.
Mr. Webb?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
And Mayor Craig.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you.
This next item is discussion regarding proposed orders to enact infrastructure advisory committee. Mr. Bell.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure I actually have the final version of that. I know I don't have it in front of me. But the background is that we've discussed in the past a formal establishment of this committee that's been meeting regularly to discuss infrastructure issues and to make this a formal ordinance. We've circulated some drafts of the infrastructure committee, and I think the primary things that we've worked on are kind of the background of what infrastructure means. Streets, sidewalks, stormwater, sewers, sanitary sewers, pumping stations, wastewater treatment, and traffic control, including those, not limited to those things. And then the makeup of the committee to be one council member, the town manager, the public works director, and 4 citizens appointed. I think that this one says 2-year. I think we had in mind 4-year terms.
Okay, council, is the makeup of the committee okay with you guys? We're talking about 4-year terms on it, so. Why don't we put this on the
August.
Let's put it on September, but I give our Kim time to advertise for applicants for the public. Is that?
Yes, sir. It's an ordinance.
Is that all right, council? Put it on September agenda? Okay, put that on September agenda.
And there's also, Kim had drafted some bylaws too, and I was gonna have a chance to look at that too, as well.
I think the committee itself would adopt those.
Oh,
when it
okay.
meets. I don't think council needs to adopt
I
them.
think
Right,
that's
right,
what the
right.
finance committee.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was the finance committee. There's too many committees, I'm sorry.
We are gonna do
You're
that
right.
too. We are gonna do that too. The infrastructure committee will also have bylaws, but I think each committee itself will.
Should adopt them, yes, I agree
Jimmy,
with
you
you.
need a lot of committees to pass the buck to, man.
I know. Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
I was gonna ask, if you don't mind, is there a criteria for, you all have anything in mind for criteria for the members that's gonna be on the board, the committee?
Generally, somebody knows something about infrastructure.
I think
I was
that'll be.
asked that question, is the reason I'm asking it. I don't know that we've had any set in place, so.
I think we'll leave
Janet
that.
Woolwine on there right now, and I don't know that she knows a whole lot, but she's learned a whole lot.
I think if you had a number of applicants that had a background in that, then they probably would look more attractive to the council, but if you had a couple interested citizens that had a passion or desire, I don't think there's any set, I mean, it's probably how you select people on the plan commission as well.
Right.
In the
I
same
think we
manner.
put, Greg Kelly actually appointed Janet, I think he appointed her on there because of her knowledge of Park Street and her interest.
But we could add certain criteria if you wanted to do that to the ordinance. I think it's probably better just to leave it to council's discretion.
I do too, but I just was asked that question. I didn't think it was a stupid question, but, you know.
No, sure.
I didn't think it was a stupid question.
No, one thing you might want to think about, which was what Mayor Craig said was, you know, about that individual who is in the Park Street area, when you're appointing these citizens, it might not be a bad idea to look at where in the town they live. It might not be a bad idea to have some representation in different areas of the town, just a thought. Not that there has to be a requirement, but to add a little bit more, you know, diversity in the composition of where they're.
Well, yeah, when you get input on which streets to pave
Right.
and stuff like that,
Yeah, it would be good, yeah.
you don't want them all in one place, do you?
Right, yeah, because people, residents see things and see, I mean, like I said, I saw things when I moved to a certain part of town, I moved to the next part of town, you know, transition, and I noticed things, so it's good to have that feedback.
Okay, next item is update on proposed changes to employee handbook related to workers' compensation policy. Mr. Manning.
Okay, what you have is a draft that Stacy and I, and then we put a final draft together and gave it to, yeah, she's handing out a hard copy. We did email it, but I wasn't sure if everybody had a hard copy or not. And then we sent it to Cam for a final review, and I think Ramesh had a few technical changes to it. But the gist of what we're changing here, and really the only thing that is really substantive is that under the terminology section, the previous version that we distributed, and I think it was first presented maybe before my arrival, I think you guys talked about it.
Briefly,
Briefly,
and
maybe
then
when-
presented when you first got
When,
here.
when I was first here, yeah. And after we presented that, and I told you I wanted to take it back to some of the staff, and we had a couple different meetings about it, me and Stacy, and then with some of the department heads. And, you know, I had an opinion on maybe a different direction on going for some of the individuals who would be injured, but fall within that window where workers' comp wouldn't be covered. And we did have an instance where there was an employee who was injured, and was back before 7 days. But it just seemed kind of unfair that the employee was required to use time that was already on the books for a job-related injury. And so there's two trains of thoughts on that. One is, well, if you do it that way, then they're gonna abuse it. And then the other train of thought is, if you don't do it that way, they're gonna try to elongate the time that they're injured to get it to the point where it does reach the eligibility of workers' comp. So there's two trains of thought on that. But I think the consensus of the staff was to be fair, and it doesn't happen that often, and we'll monitor it. So that was really the only change from a policy standpoint that we revised was workers' comp does kick in after 7 days, but if somebody was injured on the job and it was a legitimate occupational injury, that the town would cover that time that the employee would miss during those few days. So does anybody have any heartburn about that? Okay. And then we can always come back and revisit it if we feel like it's becoming an issue, and that's what I told the staff. So, but the only other changes in here were just a few technical changes, but that was really the only substantive change that was made from the last version. I know it was like 2 months ago when you looked at it, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Oh, okay. We'll put this on the agenda for the next meeting, right? We'll have it in. Do we have to have that in ordinance form? We need to do that because it's amending. No, just do it by motion. Okay. Well, I'll get with Cam. We'll get with Cam on it.
I'm not sure that.
Well, we're amending the
Council-
handbook, though. We'll talk about it. So, yeah. The next one, I mean, because this is the benefits, that's why we'll talk about it, so. I'll get with Cam and see how we do adopt it.
I think under the ordinance and the other policies that council has passed, that they've assigned all those duties to you, so you can't pass the buck on to them, you gotta approve it yourself.
I can do that. This was part of my idea, to change it this way, so, okay.
I think what we've said in the past is that council be made aware and
Okay.
we get a consensus from council, but I think that's
Okay.
the town manager managed town, that's Jimmy's call.
Okay, all right.
Anybody having a problem with the changes?
No, okay. The last item, and this was, we did actually put this in the packet, I think, didn't we? Did, okay. Here's the hard copy. That was because the workers' comp was the one that had some last minute revisions.
Credit card policy.
Credit card policy is the one that also, it's not gonna go in the personnel handbook, it's more of an operational, and I've talked to Stacy and Chuck and the department heads about putting together more of an operational procedure handbook, things that aren't necessarily policy for all departments, but things for like maybe hiring and whatnot. And this credit card policy, we really didn't change much from the last version, I don't think.
No, we did
Chuck,
not.
the only, remind me what was, because it was a couple months ago, the only thing we changed was just the authority for those purchases, those larger purchases, right?
Right.
Right. And we just made it to where if there was an exception of that larger purchase, instead of it just being cut off, we just added, as long as it was approved by the finance director and/or the manager, that we would allow that to happen. The case we gave was not usually like an IT equipment or something that might need to be purchased by credit card for next day delivery. As long as they had approval from either Chuck or me, then we would push that through and make sure we would get it. So, other than that, there was no other changes to it. So.
Okay, anybody have any problems with the credit card policy? Okay.
And I will say the system that we have in place is actually very, the program, it's the Bank of America works.
It's the state program.
It's as far as the employees using it and how user-friendly, it's actually very efficient, and it's very user-friendly for the employees to use, and I know it's helpful for finance staff to track expenditures. Anyways, so, okay. think that was it for those two.
All right, the next item on the agenda is a closed session. Go ahead, Cindy.
I'd like to make a motion that we go into a closed session pursuant to 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended for the purpose of discussion or consideration of acquisition of real property for public use or of the disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second, motion by Ms. Patterson to go into closed session, second by Mr. Bradley. Kim, call it off, please.
Mr. Bradley?
Aye.
Ms. Quetch?
Aye.
Mr. Webb?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mayor Craft?
Aye.
It's okay.
Yes, sir.
Is he asleep again?
It must be nice to be the mayor and what is it?
Correct.
Okay.
Is there a motion to go back in open session?
Yes, there is. Oh, wait, I gotta,
I motion to.
I'll make that motion.
So I'll second.
Okay.
And
I
motion
move-
and a second to go back into open session.
Yes, I move that the town.
Mr. Bradley.
Aye.
Ms. Quich.
Aye.
Mr. Webb.
Aye.
Ms. Patterson.
Being on this horse, I move that the town council certify that in the closed.
No, said it's time for just yea or nay.
Oh, okay, yay.
And Mayor Craig.
Ah.
No, you can't.
Oh, my goodness, Lord help me. I move that the town council certify that in the closed session just concluded, nothing was discussed except the matter or matters, it says one, specifically identified in the motion to convene in closed session, and two, lawfully permitted to be discussed under the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act cited in that motion.
Mr. Bradley.
I so certify.
Ms. Quich.
I so certify.
Mr. Webb.
I so certified.
Ms.
I
Patterson.
so certify.
And Mayor Craig.
I so serve.
Okay.
Okay,
But it's on a sit-up for you.
the next item on the agenda is matters not on the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I have something.
All right.
I have asked our three distinguished leaders at the Coombs Recreational Center to be here. They're right over here, and they're freezing apparently because
It is so.
'Cause I'm cold, I'm gonna turn it up one notch.
Away from him.
I'll give it to Kim, it'll get colder. The reason why, I just wanted to get you, she has a handout, and really, the only thing that really need to look, we're gonna focus on is the back. You don't even have to read it, I'm just gonna tell you a summary of what it is, and if you wanna read it later and ask me questions. We're just basically giving you an advisory heads up on a policy that we're going to change in the rec center. You know, I've been here about 2.5 months, and since I've got here, there's been many issues related to some of our younger guests at the facility, and there's been lots of issues where there's been revocation of memberships or banning children because of a violation of policies, whether it be language, disrespecting supervisors, not following rules, whatnot.
Destruction of property.
Destruction of property. So, what's that?
Drug usage.
Drug usage. We're not gonna go any further, okay, because I know there's something else. So I had actually had a pretty long discussion with Chief Sullivan during the transition period, because him and the police department they've been responding to a lot of these complaints, because when they do have issues, it at times involves the police, and then if there's a ban in place, the police have to enforce it. And, the chief and I discussed this, and he was, in my position for several months, and kind of reached the same conclusion as me, and we conveyed our concerns to the staff at CRC that we need to think about increasing the age limit on when we allow kids just to stay there without any supervision. Because they're becoming, unfortunately, they're becoming babysitters, and there's a lot of staff resources and a lot of staff time constantly, conducting disciplinary action and then involving the police. So what we've done essentially is said that with this new policy, and it's going into effect, I think this week, August 1st, we were giving time, and this is information is being distributed to the schools, that if they are 14, if they're under 14, even with the membership, they still have to have parental supervision. Unless they're in a program.
Involved in a program.
Unless they're in a program, correct. And it's not gonna affect a tremendous amount of students, we looked at that, but it is going to help better, it's going to help the staff, and ultimately, we think it's a safety benefit for the kids too, because some of the kids that are there, sometimes they don't even get picked up. You've said they've had to wait for parents, and it's an unfortunate situation, but we're hoping this will work. So I wanted to let everybody know that we're doing this, and it will be in effect on August 1st. In the event that you hear about it from somebody, or you get a phone call, please refer any questions or concerns to me or the CRC staff, or if you want to ask me for any clarification of the policy, if you get a call about it, just feel free to contact us. So.
How
Has this
many
been adopted?
people are we talking about that sort of that already come under?
We have a lot of kids that come
they're that 12 and 13-year-old age, and we welcome them to come, we're just changing the fact that they have to be supervised.
Yeah.
Unless they're in a
with
program,
age.
and the camps that they're in and all things, they can continue to do that. Yeah.
Swimming, volleyball programs, basketball, whatever we have going on that's specific for that. But really, it was with those particular youth memberships, it was less than 25 children that would be affected, and of the 25, I think 3 of them were the only active ones.
That had memberships,
that had
right. The rest of them were just paid per day, or, yeah.
Has this been adopted by the Recreation Commission?
Well, we had that discussion earlier. I talked to Derek about it, and I think Derek's thought is, and I don't know what the council's intent was when they set up that commission, was that is there not a necessary desire for the rec commission to necessarily manage every aspect and the policies of the CRC, and that's really something that we thought was just a management right that we were going to implement. But if there's an issue with it and we need to bring it to the rec commission, we can. But this is, I think, being done in the interest of the staff and the operational needs. So, and I mean, Derek, you might want to speak on that.
Yeah, you know, we have had a couple of people come to the rec commission and just completely bash policy and procedure. And honestly, it's just not a very effective thing to do at the rec commission meeting. We feel like that, or at least the committee felt like last time, that it just wasn't very productive because we don't really manage the policy and procedures. I mean, it's good to get feedback, but as far as the in-house policy and procedures, we just sort of felt like that it was.
I mean, if this was an unreasonable proposal, I think that we would.
I think somebody needs to be responsible. You know, if it's not going to be the Recreation Commission, maybe the town council should be. And if it's going to be a town council matter, I'd like to see a provision for appeal on there if there's not one. I haven't really read this. So.
Oh, well, the only thing we changed was just the age limit. Yeah, on the existing policy.
We talk with the town manager about operational things. We typically don't take a policy and procedure if we're changing something about a fitness class or a swim program or a volleyball rule. I mean, we don't take those to the advisory commission. That is what we've always understood as directors, that is not something operationally that we take to the advisory commission. That
Sure.
is.
Yeah, same discussion we had about the handbook earlier. I think that's something that's been delegated to the town manager, and I think in this particular.
I'm the one that's being held accountable. I mean, if you don't like a policy on it, you could tell me, hey, this isn't good. I think we need, change it. But this was something that I kind of initiated with the staff because of concerns that the chief and I had about some of the issues we were having there. And a lot of these policies have been in place for many, many years. The only difference is we're just changing the age limit on it. And I don't know a lot of these policies that they've adopted for the programs and stuff. I don't really have a desire to really get in the weeds on that. But since this involves the entire facility, that's why I got
How many
involved.
people you're gonna have to stop at the door and say,
Well, the schools work really well with us. Dr. Austin and Dr. Allen are phenomenal, and they have already been proactive, and they're on board even prior to the changes. I mean, for several years that we've had issues.
It used to be 10 years old.
It was 10 years old.
10 years old, and they changed it to 12 when they got there.
We changed it to 12 two
Yeah.
and a half years ago when we
Yeah.
came on board. And then we do have the issues, and I guess if you want to kind of interject, I mean, we brought our suspension books, which continue to rise, but.
And, we're having issues, we're getting there, we're dealing with these juveniles that have done something, whether it be drug use or been banned before, destruction of property. We have no idea who the parents are. They're not members, they're just guests.
Because they're paying by the
There's
day.
no supervision there, and we're dealing with 13-year-old child trying to figure out where mom or dad are, or legal guardian. And you can tell by the thickness of that book, we've had some issues through the years.
And on the other side to that, by requiring that they're there with the parent, if something were to happen and they were to get injured, not just necessarily break a policy or procedure, but if they were to get injured there, we're left trying to find that parent or guardian to try to get that child care. So there's another aspect to this, not just to keep the kids in line, but also to keep them safe and make sure that their safety is our number one goal in their care.
And then thinking on the flip side of that, we are a community center. So when we have kids doing some of the things that they've been doing and someone brings their children and their family in and they see that, they're not going to come back and see us. So it is our responsibility to be good stewards of taking care of that.
The environment.
Environment,
Yeah.
because it, we have example after example of some of the things that these 12 and 13-year-olds that are doing that I can't imagine some adults doing.
I can see your point.
Some of the stuff is.
Well taken.
And so if they are 14 and 15, they do have to have a membership to be there unattended. And the reason why it goes back to the whole safety issue with the parents, because if they're 14 and 15 and they are a member, we are able to get information, who is their legal guardian, who's the parent. And when they're 16, they can drive. So, I mean, it's not an issue at that point. I mean, usually if they need to get home, if they're late, they don't have to wait for somebody to pick them up. They're a little more responsible. So anyhow. We just wanted to let you be aware of it, and it has not gone into effect yet, but since it is a change, we just wanted to make sure we threw it out there. Yeah. That's all. Mayor, I am on that issue. Unless anybody has any questions.
Anybody got any questions? Okay,
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is council member reports. Report. Derek, report.
It's been a fairly busy month, I have to say. Tied up in the county chamber board stuff all morning and afternoon, actually. But it's been a pretty productive month.
Donna, you've been stirring up any trouble other than sidewalks and bushes?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Cindy, you got a report?
I'll have it at the regular meeting. Thank you.
All right. Al, you have a report?
No, I've mostly just been going to doctors.
You've been going to the doctor?
We want to report on that.
Al, I hope you went to the shrink doctor.
Not yet, it's on my list.
Okay.
You're on my list too.
I'm not asking what kind of list. All right, council, we're adjourned.
No? Chair could just say we're adjourned.